Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals. Hello, everyone. Welcome to DNA Talks. We're going to dive into something because of some news that I just saw, and I think there's some clarity needed. We're seeing a major spike in breast cancer in young people. When I say young people, I mean under 45. It's not typical that you see this in terms of the pathology of how breast cancer presents itself. It's usually something that happens post-menopause, and I'm going to dive into why that's typically the case. But I'm also going to give you some data right now. In 2019, if you look at American data, it was under 25,000 women under the age of 45 that were diagnosed with breast cancer. And if you look at 2020 and 2021, those numbers were pretty consistent. It seemed to be the norm. These unusual factors that would lead to early onset breast cancer. Around 2022, we saw that number double, and it went to 50K. Unusual. We didn't hear about it, we didn't talk about it, but all of a sudden this doubling. Typically, with something that significant, if there's a 5% swing, you're going to hear about it. When it's 100% and it's quiet, you have to ask why. In 2023, that number went to 300,000 women. We're talking about more than tenfold what we had been experiencing as a standard number that is acceptable based on rare genetic traits, rare circumstance, unusual factors that led to this breast cancer in young women. All of a sudden, it's 300,000 people. There's some data that came out of a military base, and the American military keeps a really solid database of healthcare history. They're constantly tracking the actively deployed soldiers and vets, and that data is actually used globally by other databases because it's so robust and because it's so well tracked for research purposes. Around the same time, 2023, we saw that there was a 400% spike in breast cancer cases amongst young service women, again, under the age of 45. So I bring this all up because it's a new reality we're in, and we have to realize the reality. And there's certain things that have been added to humanity that are causing certain problems that are leading to certain outcomes. And we cannot assume that what we used to experience is still true. Things have changed. So having said that, what do we do? The common genetic answer is the BRCA gene. I remember seeing an article from CNN a few months ago that said cancer rates in young people are dropping because of early detection and early intervention. And what did the article dive into? That because of the BRCA gene, not knowing what it does or why it causes cancer, that doctors are recommending women to get their fallopian tubes cut out in their 30s to prevent ovarian cancer. And then you ask, well, isn't BRCA a breast cancer gene? Why are they talking about it in terms of fallopian tubes and ovarian cancer? In that same article, when you're reading an article online, usually it will suggest to you other articles to read. So I keep scrolling down. Right after I read that breast cancer rates in general are dropping in young people because of amazing intervention, the recommended article, because it was algorithmically related, said cancer rates are skyrocketing in young people. The same media outlet saying two very opposite things. One was very hyper-specific around female hormones and BRCA, and one was around cancer rates in general, and the data supporting the latter. So why does this all matter? We lean on things like BRCA for early detection. without understanding what it means or what it does, and not knowing that there's so many better ways to deal with this. So what does BRCA actually do? When you go to a doctor and you're told you have the BRCA gene, cut your breasts off, or now today they're also saying cut your fallopian tubes out. Well, if it's a breast cancer gene, why would the ovarian area matter? BRCA is a tumor suppressor. So if you have cancer, it's supposed to fix it. It also fixes DNA damage. It repairs aging cells. So it's essentially a repair tool. If you have a certain version of this gene, it doesn't do a good job of repair. And so that breast cancer or ovarian cancer that someone may have doesn't get put out. The fire starts to flourish and cancer wins. So why then does it cause both ovarian and breast cancer and not other cancers? Because it doesn't cause either. It's protective in nature, but there's something else going on layers prior to that would cause these things to happen. We know in the hormone cascade, we can be very specific about a woman's hormone dominance, hormone metabolism, the quality, the clearance, all of what happens in the various steps of the hormone cascade. The genes for these are very clear. They've been mapped out. We've sat down with women and matched their phenotypes, how they physically present these genes, and verified that we are very certain about how they manifest in a woman. And we know that some women that have a fast version of the CYP19A1 gene or even the CYP17A1 end up being somewhat estrogen dominant, meaning they make a little too much. Estrogen in itself is an inflammatory toxin. So too much in itself will cause inflammation. That's just part of the story. Step 2, before clearing that estrogen, we know that women that are still cycling, have a menstrual cycle, get rid of it. Some women are menopausal, still make it, still have the cycle, there's just no menses. Before clearing, it's converted, and there's a few genes that are implicit in that outcome. There's conversion into a good, healthy estrogen metabolite called 2-hydroxyestrogen. And then there's conversion into two potentially very toxic and inflammatory estrogen metabolites called 4 and 16-hydroxyestrogen. These are known to cause DNA damage. These are known to oxidize cells. These are known to create a terrain that is open for disease to settle in because of the inflammatory state and the damage done to cells. Some women make these. Step 3 of 3. Some women also are lacking or have bad versions of the genes that drive the right detox processes. So there's a gene called COMT, which is often spoken of for neurochemicals. It regulates your mood. It regulates anxiety, depression, because of how quickly or slowly it clears neurochemicals. It also clears hormone metabolites. It's also the tail end of methylation. So single genes don't have single purposes. And in that story, a lot of women have a slow COMT gene, do not clear these metabolites well. So now you have this perfect storm of I make too much estrogen, I make a toxic version, and I'm lacking the detox capacity to get rid of it. That storm leads to inflammation. You then have an additional layer of, well, why didn't everybody with that profile get sick or breast cancer? Why certain women? Well, some of those women with that profile, also like 85% of North American women, took the birth control pill for 5 to 10 years, adding more estrogen top of that conversion funnel, netting out more estrogen metabolite. Some women don't understand hormone disruption. The phthalates are forever chemicals, something as simple as their yoga pants, where there's forever chemicals in the crotch lining, leading right into a cavity into their bloodstream. Some women don't understand that the sunscreen that they put on their skin that is full of hormone disrupting chemicals will actually occupy a hormone receptor and cause those hormones to be underutilized and then end up in the bloodstream or the tissue, causing inflammation. Some women don't know that every time they use their Teflon coated frying pan and they scratch it, and they have thousands of microplastics entering their food, also disrupting hormone pathways, and so on and so on and so on. And there's so many places we can go in terms of what causes hormone disruption, what causes estrogen mimicking, literally something entering your body that your body thinks is estrogen and allows it to do the job of estrogen and occupy estrogen receptors, and therefore your hormones become imbalanced. Then you fast forward, and we're talking about young people getting cancer, and that's unusual. But it wasn't unusual for elderly women to get cancer. And the big milestone is menopause. That's when things change. So, why does that make so much of a difference? Once you're menopausal, you no longer have a menstrual cycle, and you're no longer releasing and removing that toxic burden that you're creating on a monthly basis. Estrogen dominance, estrogen toxicity goes to period, gets removed, but you don't have a period anymore. So, where does it go? Still making it, still cycling, still making hormones. Where does it go? The body is quite intelligent and resilient, and it knows what causes damage and what doesn't. And it knows that these inflammatory estrogens, they can cause significant damage. So it figures, I want to get this out of the bloodstream. I don't want my vasculature, my veins, my arteries getting inflamed and damaged. I don't want my organs getting inflamed and damaged. So I'm going to put it somewhere safe. And the safest bet for the body is to store it in fat. Fat in itself is an organ, but you can't get fat cancer. You then take that cascade where the net result is storage of this toxin in fat, and you ask, where do women have fat? Well, in their breast tissue. And in those breasts, you have glands, milk ducts that, as a cellular structure, were not ever designed to meet up with that level of toxic insult. There's other parts of your body, your gut, your lungs, that are meant to be first lines of defenses that have a different structure. Their physical structure is different and can handle it. Here, you can't. Then you layer on top of that, there's certain protective detox genes that, beyond the detox of the toxic hormone itself, the specific location of the breast tissue, the GSTP1 gene, which we speak of as the inhalation gene, is also responsible for protecting breast tissue. And so some people also have the suboptimal GSTP1 gene and then end up finding that the same insult for them meant more. Not only were they struggling with their genetic profile, not only they have potentially the wrong epigenetic choices, but they also overloaded a location in their body that didn't have the right protection because the protective gene wasn't working. Now you have, with some level of certainty, exposure to a disease for which BRCA, after all of what I said, is now supposed to get to work, is now supposed to do something. This is when it starts to matter. And you would then figure out, why are then women cutting their fallopian tubes out? And I can tell you that I dealt with a breast cancer patient where we identified what we believed was the root cause of her breast cancer. And I'm going to get into that in a second. When we identified her root cause, she asked, well, if that's the root cause, why did I also have ovarian cancer? So, root cause. This will answer the question. She was taking bioidentical hormones. She had just entered menopause. She's 52. At the age of 50, she started taking hormones. And I'm not saying hormones are good or bad. I'm saying the protocol needs to be precise. One size fits all can be great, it can hurt you really bad. So in her case, we looked at the hormones, and she was specifically taking a product called estradiol. Estradiol is a potent form of estrogen to put into the body, and I can understand why doctors would recommend it. If you're going to take something for a certain purpose, let's take something that really works. And why take hormones? Getting rid of menopause symptoms, hot flashes, lack of sleep, staying young and healthy, bone health, brain health, skin health, hair health. There's the aesthetics and the anti-aging, and there's also the internal youthfulness of organs and structure. So I understand why it may be prescribed. But when you're taking estradiol, the same exact gene, the CYP1B1 gene that I was saying takes your estrogen and converts it into 4-hydroxyestrogen, which is a version that is DNA damaging, oxidizing, and known to be very specifically tied to breast cancer. Estradiol directly gets converted into that. So the misunderstanding from a doctor here is that when I add something to somebody's body, that's what they got. Versus I added something to somebody's body. Now there's certain genes that jump in and take that and convert it into something else. And then what is that conversion? How fast is it happening? How slow is it happening? This is why you have variable outcome where the same exact protocol is good for somebody and bad for somebody else. Somebody may not have the CYP1B1 gene as a fast open tap converting into 4-hydroxy and take estradiol for years with no issue. Somebody may have an ultra rapid clearance with the bad detox pathways, and that thing causes a disease within a couple of years, like it did to this woman. So then she told me, well, if that's true, why did I also have ovarian cancer? I wasn't doing hormones at that time. Straight away, I asked her, were you taking birth control pills? Because she told me this happened in her 30s. And she said, yes, I was taking birth control pills for 8 years. I said, well, you were taking hormone therapy. You were adding estrogen top of funnel into a funnel that nets out 4-hydroxyestrogen. The difference now, you're in menopause, you don't have a menstrual cycle. So this toxic metabolite is being stored in fatty tissue in your breast. And back then, you still had a menstrual cycle. So this toxic metabolite was flowing through your reproductive organs, causing inflammation there. And in both cases, we look at BRCA as a cause, when BRCA is the repair tool that if you have a bad version of, you don't recover so efficiently. But all of what we're describing is the actual cause. And this is where genetics and functional genomics, there's a big difference between how to utilize the tool. And if you don't understand how to utilize the tool, you end up making rash decisions like the right thing is to cut my breasts off versus understanding what the cause is. So what is genetics? Genetics is a single gene and a single meaning and a single interpretation. This gene means that. Because when I look at clinical data, it often equals this. When I see the certain version of the BRCA gene, it commonly leads to breast cancer death. Well, that also is because you don't do a good job of repair, but we didn't identify the root cause. Functional genomics is here's a gene, but here's multiple other genes that I know upstream and downstream are related to a certain net result, a certain biological function, as opposed to what does a gene means. It's what is the biological function and what genes instruct that. It's also my genes are the starting point, but my epigenetics are what drive the net result. As I said about these women and these different examples, it wasn't the profile alone that led to how they feel. It was the profile plus their choices. And not necessarily saying that they were meant to make the right choices. How would they know any better? When there's something on the shelf like birth control pill, you would think that it's seemingly safe, not knowing that the studies where it got approved maybe didn't include women that are genetically mapped like you, didn't have the same net result as you. So in the center, you have genetics, and then you have environment, nutrition, and lifestyle surrounding that center, giving you a net result. This is why when you pick up a box of birth control pill, it says right on the side of the box, risk of stroke and heart disease. Risk, meaning we don't know who it's going to happen to, but it may happen to some people. Why? Because some of those women will take this estrogen and turn it into a toxin and not be able to detoxify it. The number one leading cause of death for breast cancer patients is not cancer, it's cardiovascular disease. That's why women die of cancer, breast cancer specifically, because the same exact inflammatory insult causes both. And when the body is dealing with that level of energy utilization to fight a disease that aggressive, well, it can't fight everything else at the same time. And something fails, and it's much easier for cardiovascular disease to fail first. And I say this because, once again, it says right on the side of the box, stroke or heart disease. It doesn't say breast cancer, but it's the exact same problem. Add estrogen top of funnel to a toxic estrogen funnel, and you're going to cause inflammation head to toe, from dementia to metabolic disorders, to migraines, to fat retention, to heart disease and cancers. So we now understand there is a root cause, there's a net result, and BRCA, although it does mean something, it doesn't mean everything. It is not a cause, it is a priority. When somebody tells you BRCA gene, okay, I don't do a good job of repair, breast cancer becomes a priority for me. How do you understand breast cancer? We now have amazing tools like early detection. And I'm not talking about early detection like BRCA itself. I'm talking about the ability to look into your blood and look for cancer DNA before a tumor is even formed. This now exists. The technology exists where you can screen and understand that based on my hormones and my habits, I may be at a greater risk because of what was happening in my biology. And BRCA doesn't do a good job of killing cancer off. So I'm going to look for cancer as opposed to cutting my body parts off. And I'm going to deal with it early because when you deal with it early, it's very easy to deal with. We then also understand that there's a root cause around immune response. And I say this because everybody has cancer all the time. There's nobody walking around that doesn't have cancer cells in their body. It's a consistent, constant. And your immune system is constantly fighting it. So if we know this, we know that we need to upregulate immune function. And when you suppress immune function and you struggle there, that is again a scenario where cancer starts to win. What does that mean? You have an army of immune cells in your immune system going out there doing work to fight these cancer cells off. They are mostly coming from your gut. A good 85% of your immune system resides in your gut. I can tell you that you can't find somebody who has a chronic disease that doesn't also have gut dysbiosis. The two are directly tied together. Your gut microbiome, your immune system, your neurochemical production, some other hormone production, all happens in your gut lining. Very important organ that we think of a place where food is broken down, but it actually does so much more. And if you aren't focused on immune function, then you may find that this thing that you're relying on isn't giving you what it needs, and cancer cells start to win. Coming full circle to how we started this discussion. Everyone, most people, I should say, just took something, and sometimes multiple doses of something, that compromises the immune system. I started this by talking about young people having cancers in numbers that don't add up when you look at historical trends. And we wanted to see what the answer is, and people point to BRCA and other things. And in fact, there was, as I said, news on channels as big as CNN blaming BRCA. But a 12 times fold in 2 years doesn't add up. What does this tell us? You need to focus on your gut and your immune system. It has been compromised, and this is why you're seeing things like turbo cancers, which you would have never heard of before, and pathologies that don't make sense, where there's multiple cancers happening at the same time that usually don't present that way. Doctors are not understanding why is this happening in this combination. This is not the way the body works. The very first thing I said, the world has changed, your context has changed, your reality has changed. Whatever used to be true is no longer true. So when a doctor says this is not the way the body works, that may have been true in 2019. We now are in a new reality. And we now have to understand how the body works today. And relying on something like BRCA alone is a small slice of the story. Early detection and dealing with system compromisation is how you now, in today's reality, prioritize this. It's not, I have family history. Watch out. It's not, I have BRCA. Go cut something off. Because if you cut off the location, the same clinicians that are telling you to cut your breasts off will also agree that BRCA also causes, quote unquote, ovarian cancer. So if you cut your breasts off, aren't you just going to get ovarian cancer instead? Are you going to cut out your brain to prevent brain cancer? Are you going to cut out your lungs to prevent lung cancer? Or are we going to try and understand why this disease develops and stop it in its tracks early before it's a problem? And for women, this is such an important consideration because everything we said around the hormone cascade is now known. This wasn't common a few years ago, but we now know. And you'll hear women talking about estrogen dominance and estrogen toxicity as something they want to understand, which they previously didn't. So we now have the tools, we now have the technology, we now have a context where the work you need to do is different. The mammogram is not the right answer anymore. In fact, some will argue whether it ever was or whether it causes problems more than it prevents. So, having said all that, I go back to environment, nutrition, and lifestyle are the triggers. And it's not only that the environment, nutrition, and lifestyle cause, but environment, nutrition, and lifestyle also prevent. And if I give you a simple example, we know certain foods that upregulate the right biological pathways. As a simple example, if you were to eat spirulina, blue spirulina, the compound, the pigment that makes blue spirulina blue is called phycocyanin. Phycocyanin is known to kill cancer cells. Put it in a petri dish with cancer cells, it will win. Chemotherapy is a synthesized version of phycocyanin. So I know if I eat phycocyanin, I will do a better job. Your gut, as we said, is where your immune system lives. We know that your gut loves fermented foods, pickles, sauerkraut, fermented and pickled foods, which are rich in probiotic activity. And supporting your immune system through feeding the probiotic gut microbiome flora so that it's thriving is another tool in your arsenal to deal with this properly. We know that there's many plants and herbs that are known to kill cancer cells, and if you have them regularly, there's an amazing researcher running a charity called Maison Beljanski, and the director's father actually helped very important people in the past, politicians, etc., reverse their cancer through plant and herb-based foods that never entered the healthcare system, but were used by the elites. And so she's now studying this, researching this, and helping people learn more. But there's many places you can now go that have answers. So I would urge you to not only think about your environment, nutrition, lifestyle as threats, but also as the tools that help you prevent. And hormones are an example of a epigenetic habit that could be either one. If you just go blindly in with a general prescription, it could be the thing that causes it. Or if you go in with deep education and precision and personalization, it could be the thing that prevents it. So every habit between your environment, nutrition, and lifestyle are habits that can either support and prevent a problem or drive a problem. So you have to think about your epigenetics in both ways. What's causing the problem? What's helping me prevent the problem? And we now know so much more about this. So immune system, hormone detoxification, inflammation reduction, and glutathionization, antioxidation. There's all these core systems which you can support, which are tied to root causes. But the number one thing I would say for women is to identify hormone exposures and remove estrogen mimics and hormone disruptors that are going to occupy hormone receptors and cause your hormones to get imbalanced and slowly make you sick. So thank you guys for being here with us today. I hope I opened your eyes to what the red flags really mean and what's really going on and how much power you actually have, and to not to succumb to something like the BRCA gene. That's a priority and a warning flag. It's not a cause. The cause goes so much deeper, and you do have the ability to dive into cause and make sure that this doesn't happen to you.